The massive council chamber stretched out like a great metal cathedral among the stars. 12 species had built this place together, each adding their own touch to the design. The walls curved upward in smooth arcs that caught the light from distant suns streaming through enormous windows. In the center, a circular table dominated the space, with each species having their own section designed for their unique needs. Jake Morrison sat quietly in the human section, his hands folded on the polished surface before him. The blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps looked simple compared to the elaborate dress of the other representatives. Beside him, Lisa Carter reviewed her notes one final time, though she knew them by heart. Both humans could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. The Vorthek delegation occupied the largest section of the table. Their gray, armored skin caught the light as they shifted in their seats. General Crexton, their military leader, kept his forearms crossed in what humans had learned was a sign of displeasure. His species valued strength above all else, and they had never understood human methods of solving problems. Across from the humans, the Zilani representatives sat perfectly still. Their tall, thin frames and large heads made them look like ancient scholars, which was exactly what they were. They prided themselves on logic and reason, considering emotion to be a weakness. Their leader, Scientist Vorthmel, occasionally glanced at the humans with what might have been disappointment. The Corvani traders occupied a section filled with small screens and calculation devices. Their short, stocky builds and multiple fingers made them perfect for handling complex mathematics and trade negotiations. They cared only about profit and efficiency, and lately they had been complaining about human unpredictability in business deals. At the head of the table sat the Asterians, the oldest and most powerful species in the council. Council leader Zethkar looked like a tall, elegant bird with silver feathers that shimmered in the light. His species had been traveling among the stars for thousands of years before most others had discovered fire. They considered themselves the natural leaders of galactic civilization. The other 8 species filled the remaining sections, each with their own concerns and complaints about humanity. The humans had joined this council only 50 years ago, making them the newest members by far. In that short time, they had managed to upset the careful balance that had existed for centuries. Zethkar stood slowly, his movements graceful despite his obvious age. The chamber fell silent as his voice carried across the space without need for amplification. We gather today to address a problem that has grown too large to ignore. He began, his words translated instantly into dozens of languages. The human species has repeatedly shown that they do not understand the proper way to conduct themselves in civilized space. Jake felt Lisa tense beside him, but he kept his expression neutral. They had known this day would come. The signs had been building for months. 3 weeks ago, Zethkar continued, human negotiators ended the war between the Draconis and Helix systems. While we appreciate peace, their methods were completely unacceptable. General Crexton shifted forward, his voice rumbling through the chamber. They ignored all proper military protocols. Instead of organizing a proper surrender ceremony, they arranged some kind of festival where both sides shared food and stories. It was chaos, Scientist Vorthmel added his own complaint. The humans completely bypassed established diplomatic channels. They spoke directly to civilian populations instead of working through proper government representatives. Such behavior undermines the entire structure of interstellar relations. Jake finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. The war ended. Both sides laid down their weapons voluntarily. No one died in the peace process. We thought that was what mattered. And that, Zethkar said, pointing one long finger at Jake, perfectly demonstrates the problem. You think only about immediate results? You have no respect for tradition, for proper procedure, for the wisdom of ages. A Corvani representative activated his speaking device. Human traders have been offering goods at prices that make no mathematical sense. They give away medical supplies to worlds that cannot pay. They provide defense services without proper contracts. This behavior disrupts the entire galactic economy. Lisa leaned forward slightly. We help those who need help. We thought that was part of being good neighbors. Good neighbors follow rules, Zethkar replied sharply. Good neighbors respect the established order, humans seem incapable of either. The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement from most species. Only the Netherians, the second newest members of the council, remained silent. Their representative, a young female named Silaneth, watched the proceedings with obvious discomfort. Zethkar raised his hand for silence. We have tried to educate humanity in proper behavior. We have sent advisors. We have provided guidelines. We have shown endless patience. But 50 years have passed, and humans remain as chaotic and unpredictable as ever. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the chamber. Therefore, this council must make a difficult decision. We call for a formal vote to expel the human species from the Galactic Council of Allied Species. The words hit Jake like a physical blow, though he kept his face expressionless. Lisa's hand tightened around her stylus until her knuckles turned white. The vote will be simple, Zethkar announced. Those in favor of expulsion indicate now. One by one, 11 of the 12 species activated their voting systems. The red lights appeared on the great board above the table. Only the Netherians abstained, their section remaining dark. The vote is 11 in favor, 0 against, with 1 abstention, Zethkar declared. The motion passes. Humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Council of Allied Species. The chamber erupted in scattered applause and murmurs of satisfaction. Jake felt as if he were watching the scene from far away, as if it were happening to someone else. Zethkar continued speaking over the noise. Human colonies, ships, and personnel have 60 standard days to withdraw completely from all council. Space. All joint projects will be terminated. Old trade agreements will expire and not be renewed. Old diplomatic relations are hereby severed. Jake stood slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. The entire chamber turned to look at him, waiting for the dramatic response they expected, perhaps threats of retaliation. Maybe desperate pleas for reconsideration. Possibly angry words about injustice and short-sightedness. Instead, Jake simply nodded once. We understand, he said quietly. We'll be gone within the time frame. He turned to Lisa, who gathered her materials with steady hands despite the shock in her eyes. Together they walked toward the exit, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber. At the doorway, Jake paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. Thank you for the 50 years of partnership. We learned a lot. Then the humans left the chamber, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than anyone expected. In the days that followed, that silence would grow into something none of them could have imagined. Captain Alex Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the transport ship Liberty, watching dozens of human vessels move in perfect formation through space. The evacuation fleet stretched out before him like a river of lights against the darkness. Each ship carried families, equipment, and the hopes of people who had called Council Space home for decades. Status report, Alex called to his crew. Sector 7 evacuation is ahead of schedule, reported Lieutenant Sam Taylor from the communications station. The research station at Kepler 442 has been completely dismantled, Dr. Nina. Bell's team finished packing the last of the laboratory equipment this morning. Alex nodded, watching another transport ship dock with the orbital platform they were clearing. The efficiency of the human withdrawal had surprised everyone, including some humans themselves. There were no protests, no delays, no attempts to negotiate for more time. When the council said 60 days, humanity took it seriously. On the mining colony of Vega Prime, Chief Engineer Ben White supervised the removal of the massive drilling equipment humans had installed 5 years earlier. The Corvani overseers watched nervously as piece after piece of advanced machinery disappeared into human cargo ships. You are taking everything? Asked Supervisor Velther, his multiple hands wringing together in obvious distress. Ben wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the Corvani. Council said we had to leave. We're leaving. That includes our equipment. But the mining operation will stop completely without this machinery, Velther protested. Ben shrugged. Not our problem anymore. You voted us out, remember? The Corvani supervisor watched helplessly as the last piece of human technology was loaded onto a transport. The mining operation that had been producing rare metals for the entire sector would shut down the moment the humans left. Similar scenes played out across dozens of worlds. On the agricultural planet of Terra Nova, Dr. Nina Bell's research team packed up their crop enhancement laboratories. The local Zelani government had expected the humans to leave behind their research data as a gesture of goodwill. "We cannot simply abandon years of scientific progress," insisted scientist Mortek. Watching Nina's team load sealed containers onto their ships, Nina looked up from her clipboard. "The research belongs to humanity. We did the work, we're taking the results. But the crop failures will return without your techniques," Mortek said, his voice rising with something that might have been panic. "Then maybe the council should have thought about that before kicking us out," Nina replied calmly. The Zelani scientist stood frozen as Nina walked away. The enhanced crops that had ended famine on 3 council worlds were a human innovation. Without the ongoing research and development, those crops would gradually fail, returning to their original, much lower yields. On the military outpost of Firebase Delta, Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster oversaw the dismantling of the early warning systems that protected the outer trade routes. The massive sensor arrays had taken 2 years to build and had been stopping pirate attacks before they could begin. General Crexton arrived personally to observe the withdrawal. His forearms were crossed in what humans had learned meant he was thinking hard about something. "These defense systems," he said slowly, "they have prevented many attacks." Amy looked up from her datapad. "Yes, they have. Very effective. You will leave them in place for the good of galactic security?" Amy shook her head. "No, these are human systems built with human technology, maintained by human crews. We're taking them with us." Crexton's military mind understood strategy better than diplomacy. "The trade routes will be vulnerable." "Not our responsibility anymore," Amy said, signing another removal order. "You made it clear that humans don't belong in council space. That includes our defense systems." The Vorthic general watched as the massive sensor dish was carefully detached from its mounting. Each piece of equipment represented months of human engineering and years of tactical experience. Without these systems, the outer trade routes would be blind to incoming threats. Back on the Liberty, Captain Alex received reports from across the evacuation zone. Every human facility was being methodically emptied. Every joint project was being dissolved. Every collaborative effort was ending. "Sir," called Lieutenant Sam Taylor, "I'm getting a private message from the Netherian representative, Silaneth. She wants to speak with you." Alex frowned. The Netherians had been the only species to abstain from the expulsion vote. "Put her through." The main screen flickered, showing the young Netherian's concerned face. Her silver skin seemed to glow with internal light, and her large eyes reflected an intelligence that reminded Alex of dolphins. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, her voice soft but urgent, "I wanted to apologize for what happened in the council." "No need," Alex replied. "Your people abstained. That took courage. It was not enough," Silaneth said sadly. "I fear my elder council members have made a terrible mistake." "Your people have done so much good," Alex smiled grimly. "Well, we won't be doing it in council space anymore. Where will you go?" she asked. "Beyond the rim," Alex said. "There's a whole galaxy out there. We'll find our place." Silaneth was quiet for a moment. "Some of us will miss you." "Some of us will miss you too," Alex replied honestly. Meanwhile, on the medical station orbiting Centauri Beta, Dr. Elena Martinez was packing up her research on the Corinthian plague. The disease affected 3 council species and had been slowly spreading for decades. Elena's team had been close to a breakthrough when the expulsion vote happened. "Doctor," called the station's Asterian administrator, "surely you will leave your research data. This plague affects millions of beings." Elena looked up from her sealed sample cases. "This research represents 5 years of human work. It goes with us, but people will die without a cure," the administrator protested. "Then maybe the council should have thought about that," Elena said. Echoing Nina's words from across the sector, The administrator watched helplessly as Elena's team loaded their equipment. Years of medical research, including promising experimental treatments, disappeared into human cargo holds. On the commercial hub of New Shanghai, businessman Carlos Nash was closing down the supply networks that connected distant worlds. His logistics company had made trade between far-flung systems profitable for the first time. "This is madness," declared Merchant Prince Corval of the Corvani Trade Federation. "These supply chains took decades to establish." Carlos looked up from his financial displays. "And they'll take decades to rebuild. Good luck with that." "You cannot simply abandon profitable business relationships," Corval insisted. "Watch us," Carlos said, signing another termination contract. As the days passed, the scope of human integration became more apparent. It wasn't just that humans were leaving. It was that humans had been quietly essential to so many operations that other species had taken their contributions for granted. The defense grids went dark. The trade routes became unsafe. Research projects stalled. Medical treatments became unavailable. Agricultural worlds faced the return of famine. Economic systems that had run smoothly for decades began showing stress fractures. Through it all, humans continued their quiet, efficient withdrawal. No dramatics, no threats. Demands for reconsideration. They simply packed up their lives and their innovations and left. Captain Alex Rodriguez stood on his bridge, watching the last human transport clear council space. Behind them, they left a civilization that was about to discover just how much it had depended on the species it had just expelled. "Course set for beyond the rim, sir," reported the navigation officer. "Take us out," Alex ordered. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind only silence and the growing realization that something very important had just disappeared from the galaxy. 3 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the rim of council space. Admiral Corvanis of the Asterian fleet stood in the command center of Starbase 7, staring at the tactical display with growing concern. Red warning. Lights blinked across the screen like angry stars. "Report," he ordered his communications officer. "Pirate attack on convoy Delta 7 in the outer spiral," came the reply. 15 merchant ships destroyed, cargo valued at 2 million credits. Lost. Corvanis felt his feathers ruffle with frustration. "That's the 4th attack this week? Where are our patrol ships?" "They arrived 6 hours after the attack ended, sir." The pirates were gone. The admiral studied the star chart, noting the pattern of attacks. All occurred along routes that had been perfectly safe just months ago. The difference was obvious but painful to admit. Colonel Ryan Mitchell's human patrol fleets had been stationed along these very routes, using unpredictable patterns that kept the pirates guessing. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're receiving distress calls from 3 more convoys. Pirates are hitting multiple targets simultaneously." Corvanis closed his eyes briefly. Human tactical doctrine had been maddeningly unpredictable, but it had worked. They would split their forces in ways that violated every military manual, yet somehow always appeared where pirates least expected them. Now, with rigid Asterian patrol schedules, the criminal organizations had adapted quickly. On the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, scientist Vorthmel stared at months of failed experiments. His laboratory, once the pride of Zelani intellectual achievement, had produced nothing of value since the humans departed. "The quantum communication array refuses to function properly," reported his assistant, Dr. Felmar. "We have followed every logical procedure, but the signal coherence remains unstable." Vorthmel reviewed the data again, though he knew it by heart. Dr. Elena Martinez had been working on this same problem before her expulsion. Her approach had seemed completely illogical, using intuitive leaps that made no scientific sense. Yet, her preliminary results had been promising. "Have we attempted the human methodology?" Vorthmel asked quietly. "Sir, their methods were based on unproven assumptions and emotional responses to data. True science requires logical analysis." "True?" "Science requires results," Vorthmel replied, surprising himself, "and we have achieved none." The Zelani scientist turned back to his displays. Remembering how Dr. Martinez would stare at data patterns for hours, then suddenly announce she had found a solution. When asked to explain her reasoning, she would shrug and say it felt right. Such unscientific thinking had offended every principle Vorthmel believed in. Now, staring at his own logical failures, he wondered if there might have been wisdom in human intuition that his species had been too proud to recognize. Across the galaxy, on the trade hub of Corvani Prime, merchant Prince Corval faced his own crisis. The efficient supply networks that Carlos Nash had built were collapsing one by one. What had seemed like simple trade routes were revealing themselves to be incredibly complex systems. The agricultural shipments from Sector 12 are 3 weeks late, reported his chief logistics officer. The shipping company says they cannot find efficient routes through the asteroid fields. Corval pulled up the shipping data on his screens. The routes looked straightforward on paper, but the reality was proving much more complicated. The human logistics company had somehow managed to move cargo through dangerous space with remarkable efficiency and safety. What about the mining? Equipment for the Vega operation? Corval asked. Delayed indefinitely. Without the human drilling systems, production has dropped to 12% of previous levels. The Vorthek military is demanding answers about the strategic metal shortages. The Corvani merchant's hands moved rapidly across his calculation devices, but the numbers only confirmed his fears. Profit margins that had been stable for years were collapsing. Trade relationships that had taken decades to build were failing. Because no one could replicate the human touch for complex logistics, on the medical station above New Geneva, Dr. Ralseth of the Helix species watched another patient die from the Corinthian plague. The alien physician's normally calm demeanor cracked as he pulled the sheet over the victim's still form. That's 17 deaths this month, his assistant noted quietly. Dr. Martinez was so close to a breakthrough, Dr. Ralseth said, his voice heavy with regret. Her research team had identified the virus mutation patterns. They were developing targeted treatments. Perhaps we could contact them and request the research data, the assistant suggested. Dr. Ralseth shook his head sadly. They offered to share their preliminary findings before they left. The Council Medical Board rejected their proposal, claiming human medical practices were too primitive to be useful. The irony was bitter. Human medicine did seem primitive compared to the advanced technologies of other species. But humans had something else, a willingness to try unconventional approaches when conventional ones failed. Dr. Martinez had been experimenting with treatments that combined technology with biological processes in ways that other species considered crude. Now, with the plague spreading to new systems and the death count rising, those crude approaches seemed like lost opportunities. In the council chambers on Centauri Prime, emergency sessions had become routine. Council leader Zethkar found himself dealing with crisis after crisis that had somehow never existed before the human departure. The border dispute between the Helix and Draconis systems has escalated to armed conflict, reported the council's military advisor. Both sides are mobilizing their fleets. Zethkar's elegant head tilted in confusion. That conflict was resolved months ago. Ambassador Helen Brooks negotiated a permanent peace settlement. The peace was dependent on human mediation services, the advisor explained. With their departure, old grievances have resurfaced. Both sides claim the other is violating the agreement. The council leader studied the reports flowing across his display. Similar problems were emerging throughout council space. Disputes that had been quietly managed were becoming open conflicts. Alliances that had seemed stable were showing cracks. What was Ambassador Brooks' role exactly? Zethkar asked. She conducted informal meetings between planetary leaders. Nothing official, just personal conversations that helped prevent misunderstandings from becoming major problems. Zethkar realized with growing alarm that humans had been conducting a shadow diplomacy that the Council had never officially recognized. While the formal diplomatic corps handled treaties and major negotiations, humans had been quietly preventing smaller conflicts from escalating. On the exploration ship Endeavour, Captain Sam Taylor had been leading joint missions into unexplored space. The Netherian science officer Selenith now found herself commanding those missions alone, with crews that lacked the human willingness to take calculated risks. "Captain," her navigator reported, "the exploration of System J4471 has been cancelled. Command says it's too dangerous." Selenith looked at the star charts. Captain Taylor's human crew had regularly explored systems just as dangerous, often discovering valuable resources or making first contact with new species. Their approach had been to carefully assess risks and take appropriate precautions, not to avoid danger entirely. "What specific dangers did Command identify?" she asked. "Unusual energy readings, possible hostile entities, and gravitational anomalies," the navigator replied. "In other words, the same conditions we encounter on most exploration missions," Selenith said with resignation. She was beginning to understand something troubling. Human crews hadn't been reckless, as other species had claimed they had been brave. There was a difference, and that difference was now leaving vast areas of space unexplored because other species were too cautious to investigate. Back on Starbase 7, Admiral Kovanes received the latest intelligence reports. The data painted a picture of rapid deterioration across Council space. Crime was rising, research was stalling, trade was suffering, and diplomatic relations were becoming strained. Most troubling of all were the reports from the Outer Rim. Unknown hostile forces were probing Council defenses, testing response times and capabilities. The careful network of early warning systems and rapid response fleets that had protected Council space was gone, leaving dangerous gaps in their security. "Sir," his intelligence officer called, "we're detecting unusual ship movements beyond the rim. Large formations, unknown configuration." Corvanes felt a chill run through his body. "How large?" "At least 50 ships, sir, possibly more. They're staying just outside our sensor range." The Admiral stared at the tactical display, understanding finally hitting him like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been its immune system, quietly dealing with threats before they became visible to others. Now that immune system was gone, and the galaxy was discovering just how many dangers had been held at bay by a species the Council had dismissed as primitive and chaotic. The silence left by humanity's departure was growing louder every day. 6 months after the humans vanished from Council space, the true scope of the disaster began to reveal itself. Council leader Zethkar stood in his private office, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. Each new piece of information painted a darker picture than the last. His communication system chimed with an urgent message from the Helix system. "Council leader, this is Governor Valthane. We desperately need assistance. Our orbital station has suffered a complete power failure. 30,000 civilians are in immediate danger." Zethkar called up the engineering reports. The station's power grid was a complex hybrid system that had been upgraded several times over the years. "Have your engineers identified the problem?" That's just it," Governor Valthane replied, his voice strained. "Our engineers can't understand how the system works." The upgrades were installed by engineer Patricia Wells and her human team 3 years ago. "We don't have the technical knowledge to repair their modifications." The Council leader felt his stomach drop. He remembered Patricia Wells, a quiet human engineer who had volunteered to upgrade aging infrastructure across Council space. Her work had prevented dozens of accidents over the years, but no one had bothered to learn how her systems actually functioned. "Can you contact the original human engineering team?" Zethkar asked, though he already knew the answer. "We tried. They're beyond the rim now in human space. Even if we could reach them, why would they help us after what we did?" The communication ended, leaving Zethkar staring at a screen full of similar emergency reports. Infrastructure failures were occurring across the galaxy, all involving systems that humans had quietly improved or maintained. On the trade world of Commerce Station Alpha, economic chaos was spreading like a virus. Professor Kevin Gray's economic prediction models had been running in the background of galactic finance for years, preventing market crashes before they could begin. Without those algorithms, financial systems were behaving unpredictably. Merchant Prince Corval watched his fortune disappear as markets collapsed in waves. "How did this happen?" he demanded of his financial advisors. The human economist Professor Gray had developed warning systems, one advisor explained nervously. His models predicted market instabilities and automatically triggered small corrections to prevent larger crashes. "Why didn't we know about this?" Corval shouted. His work was classified as background optimization. The Council Economic Board never paid much attention to human contributions to financial stability. Corval stared at the numbers cascading down his screens. Entire sectors of the galactic economy were collapsing because they had lost the early warning system that had been protecting them for years. In the military command center on Vorthak Prime, General Crexton faced his own devastating revelation. Intelligence reports showed that 3 separate hostile alien empires had been building their forces beyond Council space for years. The only thing that had prevented them from attacking was their uncertainty about Council military capabilities. "General," his intelligence chief reported, "we've intercepted communications from the Krexvar Empire. They've been monitoring our defense patterns for months. They know about the gaps in our coverage." Crexton studied the tactical displays. The Krexvar, the Nexus Coalition, and the Shadow Fleet had all been potential threats for years. But something had kept them from acting. What changed? He asked. Intelligence analyst Mary Johnson was coordinating our strategic deterrence programs, the chief explained. Her work created the impression that Council military strength was much greater than it actually was. She arranged ship movements and communication patterns that made our enemies believe we had forces positioned in areas where we had nothing. The general's forearms clenched into fists. A human intelligence analyst had been running psychological warfare operations that had protected the entire galaxy, and the Council military command had never even known about it. "The Krexvar are massing for an attack," the intelligence chief continued. "They're confident they can defeat us now that they understand our real capabilities." Meanwhile, on the research station at Kepler 452, Dr. Richard Stone's quantum communication project sat abandoned. The Zeleni scientists who had taken over the work were completely baffled by his approach. "The human methodology makes no logical sense," Dr. Felmar complained to his supervisor. Dr. Stone was using quantum entanglement in ways that violate several fundamental principles. Scientist Vorthmel examined the incomplete research data. Yet his preliminary results showed a 97% improvement in signal clarity. "Impossible," Felmar insisted. "The quantum states he was manipulating should have collapsed immediately." "But they didn't," Vorthmel said quietly. "Perhaps there are aspects of quantum mechanics that human intuition allowed them to perceive that our logic cannot grasp." The admission was painful for a species that prided itself on intellectual superiority. The humans had been making scientific breakthroughs not despite their emotional approach to research, but because of it on the diplomatic front, Ambassador. Julie Fox's absence was creating ripple effects throughout the galaxy. The young Netherian representative Sileneth found herself dealing with conflicts that seemed to emerge from nowhere. "The territorial dispute between Sectors 7 and 9 has escalated to a trade war," her aide reported. "Both sides claim they have historical rights to the disputed systems." Sileneth reviewed the files. "Ambassador Fox negotiated a settlement to this dispute 2 years ago. What happened?" "The settlement was based on informal agreements between planetary governors. Without Ambassador Fox to maintain those personal relationships, the agreements are breaking down." The Netherian representative was beginning to understand something that the older council members had missed. Human diplomacy wasn't just about formal treaties and official negotiations. It was about personal connections, trust, and the patient work of building relationships between individuals. Ambassador Fox had spent years making friends with governors, mayors, and local leaders across the galaxy. Those friendships had prevented countless small conflicts from becoming major wars. Now, without those personal bonds, old grievances were resurfacing everywhere. In the depths of space, Captain Tony Clark's exploration missions had been quietly mapping dangerous regions and making first contact with unknown species. The Council was now discovering that several potentially hostile civilizations had been contacted by human exploration teams. "Sir," the Netherian exploration commander reported to Seleneth, "we've received a message from the Sigma Draconis system. An unknown species is demanding to speak with Captain Clark about territorial boundaries." "What territorial boundaries?" Seleneth asked. "Apparently, Captain Clark negotiated an agreement with them 3 years ago. They respected Council space because they trusted his word. Now they're saying the agreement died with the human departure." The implications were staggering. Human exploration teams hadn't just been discovering new worlds and resources. They had been conducting first contact diplomacy with species that the Council didn't even know existed back in the Council chambers. Emergency sessions had become a daily occurrence. Council leader Zethkar faced a room full of panicking representatives, each bringing news of fresh disasters. "The medical crisis is spreading," reported the Helix representative. "Without Dr. Martinez's research, the Corinthian plague has mutated. It's now affecting species that were previously immune. The agricultural worlds are reporting crop failures," added the vegan delegate. "The enhanced seeds that humans developed are reverting to their original lower-yield forms. Pirate attacks have increased by 400%, General Craxton announced grimly. "Our patrol fleets cannot protect the trade routes without human tactical support." Zethkar listened to the litany of disasters, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been its foundation. "We need to contact them," someone suggested. "Surely they would return if we asked." "And why would they?" Seleneth asked quietly. "We told them they were too primitive for civilized space. We expelled them with contempt. Why would they want to come back to help us?" The chamber fell silent, as the full weight of their situation settled over them. They had not simply lost a member species. They had destroyed their own civilization. By rejecting the very people who had been holding it together, the most painful realization was yet to come. Intelligence reports were beginning to suggest that humanity hadn't simply disappeared into empty space. They had been building something new beyond the rim, something that might be far better than what they had left behind. The Council that had rejected humanity was about to discover that humanity had found much better friends among the stars. 1 year after the expulsion, the galaxy burned. Admiral Corvanis stood in the ruins of what had once been the command center of Starbase 7. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across broken consoles and shattered displays. Through the cracked viewport, he could see the wreckage of 12 Council warships floating like dead metal insects against the stars. The Krexvar Empire had struck without warning, hitting 4 major Council worlds simultaneously. Their black ships had swept through Council defenses like a hot knife through ice, using tactics that seemed to anticipate every move the Council forces made. "Casualty report," Corvanis called to his surviving communications officer. "New Geneva is gone, sir. Orbital bombardment destroyed the surface cities. Kepler Station fell after 6 hours of fighting. The mining world of Vega Prime has been occupied." The officer's voice shook. "Total military losses are estimated at 60% of our defensive fleet." Corvanis closed his eyes, remembering Colonel Steve Palmer's warnings about the Krexvar military buildup. The human tactical advisor had briefed the Council about potential threats 18 months ago, but his unconventional strategies had been dismissed as too chaotic for serious military consideration. Now those same unconventional strategies might have saved the Council worlds. Instead, the rigid battle formations and predictable tactics that other species favored had been studied and countered by enemies who had been watching for years. "Sir," the communications officer continued, "we're receiving surrender demands from the Krexvar fleet. They want complete submission within 48 hours. The admiral stared at the tactical display, knowing they had no choice. Without human tactical flexibility, the Council military had proven no match for an enemy that had spent years studying their methods. On the trade world of Commerce Station Alpha, economic collapse had reached catastrophic levels. Merchant Prince Corval sat in his empty office, watching the final numbers scroll across his screen. His vast trading empire had crumbled along with the rest of the galactic economy. The supply chains are completely broken, his last remaining advisor reported. Without the human logistics networks, we cannot move goods between systems efficiently. Transportation costs have increased by 800%. Corval thought about Captain Diana Ross, who had managed trade route security with her small fleet of human ships. Her crews had known every pirate hideout, every dangerous passage, every shortcut through asteroid fields. They had made interstellar trade profitable by making it safe. What about the mining operations? Corval asked, though he already knew the answer. Production is down to 5% of previous levels. The Vega mines fell to the Krexvar, and without human drilling technology, the other sites are barely functional. The irony was bitter. The Council had expelled humanity for being too chaotic and unpredictable in business dealings. Now they were discovering that human chaos had been the only thing holding their economy together. In the medical centers across Council space, Dr. Rawalsith worked desperately to treat victims of the latest plague outbreak. The Corinthian virus had mutated again, and without Dr. Elena Martinez's research, they were fighting a losing battle against an enemy they couldn't understand. "Doctor, the patient in room 7 is showing new symptoms," his assistant reported. "The virus seems to be adapting faster than our treatments." Dr. Rawalsith looked at the latest test results with growing despair. The human medical team had been developing adaptive treatments that could evolve along with the virus. Their approach had seemed crude and unscientific to other species, but it had been showing promise. "How many deaths this week?" he asked quietly. 347, sir. The virus has now spread to 6 species that were previously immune. The doctor remembered Dr. Martinez's frustrated words before she left. "This virus doesn't follow your rules. It adapts and changes. You need treatments that can adapt and change too." The Council Medical Board had rejected her proposals as too experimental and dangerous. Now, watching patients die from a disease that human medicine might have cured, Dr. Rawalsith understood that sometimes experimental and dangerous was better than safe and dead. On the diplomatic front, the careful web of alliances that had held the galaxy together was unraveling. Ambassador Helen Brooks's quiet personal relationships had been the invisible glue that prevented small disputes from becoming major conflicts. Siloneth found herself mediating between the Helix and Dracona systems as their border dispute escalated toward open warfare. Both sides claimed the other had violated their peace agreement, and without Ambassador Brooks to provide neutral mediation, there was no one they trusted. "The Helix delegation refuses to attend the peace talks," her aide reported. "They say the Draconis have broken faith and cannot be trusted." "What specifically triggered this latest crisis?" Siloneth asked. "A trade ship was detained at the border." Both sides claimed different things about what happened. Ambassador Brooks used to handle these small incidents before they became major problems. Siloneth realized that human diplomacy had worked not because of grand treaties or formal agreements, but because of personal trust. Ambassador Brooks had spent years building friendships with leaders on both sides. When problems arose, those leaders would talk to her privately instead of making public accusations. Without those personal relationships, every small misunderstanding was becoming a potential cause for war. The most disturbing reports came from the intelligence services. The Netherian spy network had been tracking human activities beyond the rim, and what they found was both amazing and terrifying for the Council. The humans have established 17 new colonies in the past year. Intelligence Chief Morthanel reported to Siloneth. "They've made contact with at least 8 previously unknown species." "Are these species hostile?" Siloneth asked. "On the contrary, they appear to be forming alliances with humanity. The humans are building something they call the Independent Human Alliance." Siloneth studied the intelligence reports with growing amazement. Instead of hiding in defeat, humanity had been thriving beyond Council space. They had found new partners, new worlds, and new opportunities. "What about their technology?" she asked. That's the most concerning part, Morthanel replied. Human. Technological advancement has accelerated dramatically. They're developing systems that appear to be more advanced than anything in council space. The reports painted a picture of human innovation unleashed from the constraints of council regulations and traditions, without being forced to follow established protocols. Human scientists and engineers were making breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. There's more, Morthanel continued. The humans have been sharing their medical research with their new allies. Dr. Martinez's plague research has led to cures for 17 different diseases that affect the species they've encountered. Silanath felt her heart sink. While council species died from diseases that human medicine might have cured, humanity was healing their new friends beyond the rim. And their military? She asked, dreading the answer. Colonel Palmer has been training combined defense forces with their allied species. Intelligence suggests they've developed new tactical doctrines that integrate the strengths of multiple species. The implications were staggering. While the Council military crumbled under Krexvar attacks using predictable tactics, humanity was building a new kind of military force that combined human adaptability with alien capabilities. Back in the Council chambers, emergency sessions had given way to crisis management meetings. Council leader Zethkar faced the reality that his government was collapsing under the weight of cascading failures. The economic projections show complete financial collapse within 6 months, reported the Corvani representative. The military cannot protect our remaining worlds from further attacks. Medical crises are spreading faster than we can respond. What about seeking aid from neutral species? Suggested the vegan delegate. Most neutral species are now aligned with the Human Alliance, Zethkar replied bitterly. Ambassador Fox established relationships with dozens of species that we never even knew existed. They see us as the faction that betrayed humanity. The room fell silent as the full scope of their situation became clear. They hadn't just expelled humanity from galactic civilization, they had expelled themselves from human-supported galactic civilization. We have one choice remaining, Silanath said quietly. We must seek reconciliation with humanity. And why? Would they help us? Zethkar asked. We treated them with contempt. We expelled them as unworthy of civilized society. Why would they want anything to do with us now? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. The council that had rejected humanity would now have to humble themselves before the species they had cast out. Hoping that human forgiveness was stronger than human memory outside the council chambers, the galaxy continued to burn, and time was running out for the civilization that had thought it could survive without the friends it had so foolishly rejected. 18 months after the expulsion, the small diplomatic ship Harmony crossed into human space, carrying the most humble delegation in galactic history. Silanath stood on the bridge, watching the massive human space station grow larger through the viewport. The structure dwarfed anything in council space, its gleaming towers and rotating sections speaking of prosperity and advanced technology. My gods, whispered the Asterian diplomat Volter, who had reluctantly joined the delegation. How did they build something so magnificent in such a short time? Silanath studied the readings on her scanner. The station showed energy signatures, unlike anything she had seen before. Perhaps they always had this capability. We just never bothered to ask what humans could accomplish when they were free to try. The communication system crackled to life. Diplomatic vessel Harmony, this is Admiral Jake Morrison of the Independent Human Alliance. State your business in human space. Silanath stepped forward to the microphone. Admiral Morrison, this is Representative Silanath of the Netherian Republic. We request permission to discuss matters of mutual concern. There was a long pause before. Jake's voice returned, cooler than before. I remember you, Silanath. You were the only one who abstained from the expulsion vote. What brings the Council to human space? Desperation, Silanath answered honestly, and the hope that humans are more forgiving than we deserve. Another pause then. Docket Bay 7. You'll be escorted to the diplomatic quarters. As their ship settled into the docking bay, Silanath marveled at the efficiency of the operation. Human and alien workers moved together seamlessly, representing at least a dozen different species she had never seen before. The human alliance had clearly grown far beyond anything the Council had imagined. Admiral Morrison met them at the airlock, flanked by representatives from several alien species. Siloneth recognized none of them, realizing how limited the Council's knowledge of the galaxy had been. "Admiral," she said, offering the traditional Netherian greeting of respect. "Thank you for seeing us." Jake studied the small delegation with carefully neutral eyes. "You're a long way from Council space, Siloneth. Last I heard, your government was dealing with some serious problems." Volter stepped forward, his silver feathers ruffled with barely contained pride. "We seek an audience with human leadership regarding matters of galactic security." "Galactic security?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. 18 months ago, the Council told us we were too primitive to contribute to galactic security. What changed?" Siloneth placed a restraining hand on Volter's arm before he could respond with typical Asterian arrogance. "Everything changed, Admiral. We were wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong." Jake's expression softened slightly. "Come on, there are some people you should meet." He led them through corridors that hummed with activity. Humans worked alongside aliens Siloneth had never seen before. Their cooperation so natural it seemed they had been partners for decades rather than months. "How many species are part of your alliance?" she asked. 23 as of last week, Jake replied. "We seem to make friends easily out here. Turns out most species appreciate partners who don't judge them for being different." They entered a vast conference room where familiar faces waited around a circular table. Dr. Elena Martinez was there, looking healthier and more confident than Siloneth remembered. Captain Tony Clark sat beside representatives from several alien species. At the head of the table, Dr. Lisa Carter rose to greet them. "Siloneth," Lisa said warmly. "It's good to see you again. Though I admit I'm surprised to see Council representatives this far from home." "Dr. Carter," Siloneth replied, "we come seeking your help. The Council is collapsing." "So we've heard," Lisa said, gesturing for them to sit. "The Krexvar attacks, the economic failures, the plague outbreaks. We've been monitoring the situation." Volter's feathers bristled. "You've been watching our suffering and done nothing?" Dr. Carter's expression remained calm. "You expelled us from galactic civilization, remember? You made it very clear that our help was not wanted or needed." "But surely humanitarian concerns," Volter began. "Like the humanitarian concerns you showed when you forced us to abandon our medical research?" Dr. Martinez interrupted quietly. "Research that might have saved thousands of lives?" The Asterian diplomat fell silent, finally understanding the magnitude of their mistake. Siloneth leaned forward. "Dr. Carter, I won't insult you by pretending we didn't earn this situation. We judged you harshly, expelled you unjustly, and ignored your contributions. But our people are dying." "People die in wars," Captain Clark said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much conflict. "The question is, what has the Council learned from this experience?" "That we were fools," Siloneth answered simply. "That we let pride and prejudice blind us to your value. That we threw away the best thing that ever happened to galactic civilization." Lisa studied the delegation carefully. "And what exactly are you asking for?" Volter swallowed his pride with visible effort. "We formally request that humanity consider rejoining the galactic community, with full recognition of your contributions and equal partnership in all decisions." "Equal partnership?" Jake laughed, but not unkindly. "The same council that voted 11-0 to expel us now wants us as equal partners?" "The Council has changed," Siloneth said desperately. "The disasters have shown everyone what we lost. There would be no opposition to human readmission." "Doctor." Martinez leaned back in her chair. "But why would we want to rejoin the Council? We've built something better out here." She gestured to a holographic display that showed the extent of human space. The independent human alliance stretched across dozens of systems, connected by trade routes and mutual defense pacts. "Our research proceeds without interference," Dr. Martinez continued. We've cured 17 diseases in the past year, including 3 that were considered impossible to treat. Our exploration fleets have made contact with 47 new species. Captain Clark added, "Most of them are eager to join our alliance because we treat them as equals from the first meeting." "Our economy is thriving," added Admiral Morrison. "Trade flows freely between species who trust each other. Crime is almost non-existent because everyone benefits from cooperation." Silonith felt her heart sinking as she realized the scope of human achievement. They hadn't just survived their expulsion, they had used it as an opportunity to build something far better than the Council had ever been. "I understand," she said quietly. "You have no reason to help us. We made our choice, and now we must live with the consequences." Dr. Carter was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. "You're right that you made your choice. But humans make choices too. And we choose not to hold grudges when people are willing to learn from their mistakes." Hope flickered in Silonith's eyes. "However," Lisa continued, "we won't simply rejoin the old council. If we're going to work together, it has to be on the basis of a new kind of alliance. One that values diversity, respects different approaches, and treats all members as equals." Volter leaned forward eagerly. "What are your terms?" "First, the current council structure must be dissolved," Lisa said firmly. "No more hierarchy based on age or technological development. Every species gets an equal voice. Second, the new alliance must be open to any species that agrees to the principles of mutual respect and cooperation. No more exclusive clubs. Third, there must be formal recognition that different species have different strengths, and those differences should be celebrated, not suppressed. And finally," Jake added, "any species that joined our alliance during the Council's collapse gets to keep their full membership and rights. We don't abandon our friends." Silonith looked at Volter, who was struggling with the implications. These terms would require the proud, ancient Council to completely reinvent itself. "The Council leaders will resist these changes," Volumeter said finally. "Then they can continue to face the Krexvar alone," Dr. Carter replied. "We're not interested in propping up a failed system. We're only interested in building something better." Silonith made her decision. "I will take your proposal to the Council, and I will recommend that we accept every term." "What about your own government?" Lisa asked. "Will the Netherians support this new alliance?" "The Netherians have been your allies in spirit since the day you left," Silonith replied. "We would be honored to be your allies in fact." 6 months later, the new Galactic Alliance held its first assembly. The enormous space station that served as headquarters orbited a neutral star, built jointly by 38 different species. In the central chamber, representatives from dozens of worlds worked together on problems that had once seemed impossible to solve. The Krexvar Empire had been defeated not through military might alone, but through the Alliance's ability to coordinate. The unique strengths of multiple species: human tactical flexibility, Vorthic military power, Zilani scientific precision, and Netherian diplomatic skills had combined into something no enemy could stand against. Dr. Elena Martinez's medical research, now supported by the biological knowledge of 20 different species, had produced cures for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The Corinthian plague was a memory, and new treatments were being developed every month.